everyone. Welcome to Let's Talk About Brand. I, of course, am your host, Christine Gritman. We're coming at you every single week with a drop of the podcast of Let's Talk About Brand via the Adweek Podcast Network on Mondays, findable on the podcast listener of your choice. We also have the video podcast dropping on YouTube every Friday, so welcome if you're joining us over there. And then in between the two, I host Chat About Brand on Twitter on Tuesdays on the same topic as that week's show. This week's show is all about brand positioning, one of the most crucial elements of any branding process. So we're going to talk today about what brand positioning is, what it means, what it doesn't mean, and what are perhaps some distracting, buzzwordy elements that aren't as important as some agencies would like you to believe. We're going to really get into it today. And today our guest, Todd Irwin, knows all about it. He is the chief strategist at Frasier, which is a branding and creative agency. So without any further ado, let's bring Todd on. Hello, Todd. How are you doing?
Hey, Christine. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to be here.
Yeah. Now, this is very interesting. So I thought we were going to be talking about one thing today via, our emails. And then when we had our chat before we went live, I realized that we're actually taking it in a slightly different direction, which I love. I love that this is actually going to be a pretty meaty discussion today. So one of the things that we were kind of planning for before was talking about brand purpose and purpose-based positioning. But apparently that's kind of not as useful a buzzword as I would have thought. So first and foremost, let's kick things off. Tell us what purpose-based branding is and why it's perhaps not all some people are cracking it up to be in the world of branding right now.
Well, it is a real buzzword. It is such a buzzword that there are actually agencies that use the word in their agency name. I believe there's an agency called Purpose, and that's all they do is brand purpose. It really has, gotten to the forefront of agency thinking when it comes to brand strategy. I'm a little bit of a contrarian on the subject, and it's not that I don't believe brand purpose is important. I do. I think brand purpose is incredibly important. It's just that what's happened is a lot of agencies want their clients to lead with brand purpose. And I just don't think that's, what they should be doing. And the reason is that consumers, when they're in buying mode, they're not walking out onto the street or going onto Google, to find something. They're not thinking of, in terms of, let me find a brand that's got a great purpose. They're thinking in terms of, I need something, right? I got to buy it, right? Whether, it's a service or whether it's an actual hard product, right?
Well,
they're
actually,
thinking of, I've got a desire, or I have a pain point I want to solve. That's what they're thinking. So I think that companies have to lead with relevance.
So to that end, I actually want to back up there for a second. You said that when customers are going out to buy something, they're not necessarily looking for a brand's purpose, as it were. They're looking to fulfill their need. However, there has been an increase in recent years. People have been talking about an increase in customers really wanting the brands that they support and the brands they spend their money with to align with their values. Now, values and purpose are slightly different things. So can you actually define what you mean by brand purpose and how it perhaps differs?
Well, I think purpose is something that's bigger than just sales, right? So obviously the big case study is Patagonia. Their CEO's got a higher purpose about the world. Tom's was another one. So many brands. They've aligned themselves with a higher purpose, and so that's what purpose is. But I think I want to be very clear here. I do think that purpose is very important. Actually, purpose can be a differentiator. It's just that I don't believe that companies should be leading with purpose. I think they have to lead with understanding customer pain points and desires. And I think it's a mistake that agencies have sort of shifted their services to strategizing for their clients based around this idea of purpose. So.
That makes sense. You've got to bring the goods. If you have a great brand purpose, but you're not actually delivering something that solves for your customer's pain point,
Yep.
what's the point? I like that. It kind of gets back to everyone. To be fair, I like the whole idea of knowing your why, but it can't be your everything. So to your point, we need to lead with relevance, is what you say brands need to do. So let's dive into that. How do you feel brands should lead with relevance, and how do they find that relevance? How do they define it and refine it?
I mean, when it comes to relevance, it's all about figuring out desires, right? You got to dig into who's your customer, figure out, what are their deep desires, what are they looking for, and also pain points. When we work with clients, we do a ton of workshopping up front to figure out those two things. And then if you really want to compete in a market, once you've got like desires figured out, once you have pain points figured out, you really know what they are for your customer or customers, right? You can segment your customers as well. Then, okay, how do we position ourselves against our competitors? And the best way to do that is through an approach that we call depositioning, where you highlight a positive about your company that shines a negative light on your competitors. And there's a
So
lot of great case studies around big companies that are doing that really, really well.
So I'm curious about that, because that and I'm sure there's more to it than this, but that immediately sounds to me like leading with the negatives.
It's not.
And yeah, I've gathered from our conversation before that that's not necessarily what it is. That's just where my brain goes when you talk about highlighting what your competition lacks. So
Yeah.
can you get into what it
Sure.
actually means and what it actually looks like in practice? Depositioning?
Sure. Yeah, of course. And, I just wrote an article in Branding Mag about this. And the two big case studies that I cited were Apple and Starbucks. And so I think Apple is the biggest example of it right now. And they've been doing it for the last 5 years. And it's how they've positioned their brand around privacy, right? And so what's the story behind that? The story is that Apple, since their inception, has and was always positioned around this idea called usability, right? Best computer in the world, so easy to use, all about design, right? Steve Jobs was all about this idea called usability. The company was built around it, right? They built their products around it, they built their messaging around it. Everything about the company was built around this idea of usability. And then what happened? Siri came out. Siri was first to market, and they lost. Siri lost the war to Alexa, and Apple never loses, right? But Alexa won. But what did Apple do? Apple looked at the market. They're like, oh, how are we going to compete better, right? What can we deliver? They looked at customer desires. They looked at customer pain points. And what was the pain point? The pain point with what Amazon was doing was transparency. People were afraid that Alexa was listening to everything that they did, right? There was a privacy issue. Apple is smart. We can deliver on privacy. Like, we can really deliver on it. And they did deliver on it. They delivered on it in a way that was so compelling. If you remember 5 years ago, that terrible
Cambridge
terror,
Analytica with Facebook,
no,
or
no, no, the terrorist attack in
ooh,
Orlando.
uh-huh.
Uh, and they killed
Pulse.
the terrorist, and they found his phone.
Ooh,
And the FBI went to Tim Cook and said, "Can you unlock this?" And he said, "No, because we have a privacy policy." Like, you
wow.
can't align with the brand positioning better than what Tim Cook did in that instance. And there, if you look at Apple's advertising, it's the same way that that Volvo leads with safety. They lead
Mhm.
with privacy now. Privacy is all Apple. So
So I'm
it's a
intrigued by
great
that
case
because
study of positioning. Yeah.
you mentioned Siri at the beginning and how Amazon lost after a while because people were worried that Amazon's Alexa was listening to everything. But people worried about that with Siri too. A lot of people were saying, the reason I'll be talking about something in real life and then ads for it will pop up on my social media feeds and my web browsing moments later is because Siri's always listening. So how did Apple overcome that? Because this is the thing because I'm someone personally who has Siri turned off on my phone. I'm not even particularly concerned about privacy in general, to be quite honest, but I have Siri turned off on my phone because I don't want it listening all the time. So
Yeah.
how does Apple answer to something like that with the commitment to privacy?
Yeah, I mean, I think, listen, without, getting into the deeper technology side of this, I think the bottom line is that Apple has tried to deliver on a much higher level of a technological product that delivers on privacy. They have a very confined network that's very closed. I think in general, though, the product you're talking about, a product that is listening to you all the time, is always going to have or create that fear with people in general. The difference is that Apple's owning privacy, and they're creating products that are built around privacy. They're owning it from a brand standpoint, from a product standpoint, from a messaging standpoint. Amazon's not doing that, right? Amazon is all about open book, A to Z. I think it has influenced Google. If you're analyzing advertising right now and messaging of brands, Google is trying to put out there a privacy message as well and say that they're investing in privacy technology because Google Home actually owns a bigger percentage of the market than Apple does. So Google Home has actually won over Siri too. But Google sees that there's a serious customer pain point. I haven't seen Amazon invest yet in privacy. I could be wrong about that. Maybe they are. But I just haven't seen it, and I have been monitoring it. So
So, one of the interesting things about the examples that you brought up here is that all of those are brands where that particular thing didn't necessarily start out as their brand message. Apple's original brand message was, of course, famously, think
yeah,
different. It was about being an alternative to the then IBM dominated world of personal computing.
yeah,
And Amazon, of course, started as a bookseller and now is an everything seller, and of course is now Alexa. But back then it wasn't about privacy. So
yeah.
this is an interesting question about how the positioning you're leading with can shift essentially. So what are some elements of that you think are important in order for that sort of positioning shift to be successful and for people to buy it?
Well, I mean, when we approach brand positioning, again, it really is looking at customer desires, definitely pain points, and then figuring out how are we going to differentiate ourselves from competitors by highlighting their negatives. Apple did it with privacy. Starbucks does it with this idea of community. And if anybody's read Howard Schultz's book about Starbucks, they've got this concept called the third place, which is you've got home, you've got work, and then you've got Starbucks, right? Starbucks delivers on this place where you can go, you can get coffee, you can work all day. They're not going to kick you out. It's got a bathroom, you could eat lunch, right? It's got this very European vibe. It's very homey, right? It's that third place in your life. That's what they want. How is that deep positioning? That is deep positioning against Dunkin' Donuts, right? 50-cent coffee doesn't taste very good, but delivers the caffeine. It's not a great, it's a kind of an eyesore in the neighborhood,
That's
right?
really funny. I've got a Dunkin' cup right here.
Right. No, listen, I get it. Nothing
It
against
was
Dunkin'
drive
Donuts. Of
through.
course
I
it is.
didn't
Right.
gather or hang out with anyone there. The only person I hang out with at a Dunkin' Donuts is my friend Tim Sohn because he's very into Dunkin'. Other than that, it is drive through only. But I just want to say one interesting thing because again, to sort of shift the perception of positioning,
Yeah.
Starbucks and community,
Yes.
10, 15, 20 years ago, that would have been a disconnect simply because Starbucks had a reputation as pushing out community spaces of community coffee shops, of the little mom and pop coffee shops. So
Yeah.
that's an interesting point of shifting the focus. And I feel like they did even more than just a third place concept with that. I feel like they've done a lot with personalizing the community connection in their stores
They did.
as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, and the way that they design their stores into communities now. I mean, I live in Manhattan, and specifically, I live in the East Village, which is a very sort of alternative, artistic, community, very diverse, right? Nobody wanted a Starbucks here, right? And when they came, we were like, oh no, a Starbucks hit our neighborhood. What's gonna? And they designed it right into the community. It's a perfect match to this community. And if you analyze how they have approached this in other communities, they've done an amazing job. I mean, they are the complete opposite of a Dunkin' Donuts, which, I think a Dunkin' Donuts, like, or even a 7-Eleven, sorry to go negative on brands here, but they lower the visual aesthetic of a community. Starbucks doesn't do that. And that's the big idea that Howard Schultz had. I mean, it's quite brilliant. Quite, whether you like him or not, the brand strategy is quite brilliant.
And it's interesting because you mentioned that, towns that were like, oh, we can't have a Starbucks here. I have that up here in Nyack, New York. In fact, there's a song called Busting Up a Starbucks that mentions Nyack. That Starbucks is the only chain business whatsoever in the village of Nyack, and yet it's very successful. I might be popping by there later today. So
There's the value of the brand strategy right
mhm.
there, right?
Yeah,
It delivers in a way that they can do things that other brands can't.
I can just order it on the app.
But
That's
also,
really what it's about.
but because they do it, right, they can charge more money.
They
They're not
can, and they do.
charging 2x, 3x, 4x on a cup of coffee
And
because
they've
they
made it
do it
so
on the
easy. They've made it so easy to literally text a gift card to somebody that I'm not even paying for my Starbucks because I have so many gift cards that people just easily send to me. They have streamlined the experience, and I feel like, as you said, convenience is one of the main things about Starbucks, but I love that you pointed out that they've added in the community element, which previously was
Yeah,
something that people used to try to deposition them, if
that's
you
right.
think about it.
And I love what you just said about brand experience. You're spot on because, and I would argue, and I'll do it right now. I'm going to argue this right now.
Go for
That
it.
that brand experience is way more important than brand purpose. Again,
Mm,
I think brand purpose is important. I think it's noble. I think it's wonderful if you do it and you mean it. But what is the customer looking for? The customer is looking for to solve the pain point or a desire, and then the brand experience. Number two, if it's a great experience, I'm coming back. I'm coming back to a restaurant. I mean, I think it was Danny Meyer who said this. He said we're actually more about experience than we are about food. Food's important, like probably like number 1.2, right? But it's the experience. And if you read that, I forget the name of Danny Meyer's book, but it's a great book, and he talks about the experience that he had growing up with his dad, flying around the country, and going to the airport and the airlines, that experience he had with flight attendants. They were always so nice. They always were welcoming, even like in the worst, like turbulence or whatever, right? Sitting on the runway, they were always so nice. He's like, I'm going to bring that experience into a restaurant. And that's what he says makes his restaurants popular. People want to come back. So brand experience, I mean, it's critical. And so I'm going to argue it's the number two thing.
I love that. No, this is great. So let's get into the brand positioning hierarchy. So you did mention that you feel like purpose is, maybe a little later, maybe three. You just said experience is two. Let's kind of go through the list of the things you think are most important in brand positioning. In fact, can we start out with
You're
a
gonna, you're gonna make me make a list off the top of my head right now?
I
Oh my God.
am. I
How dare
am
you?
making you work here. No. First and foremost, what is brand positioning? Like I feel like we've talked about it this whole show, but how are we defining brand positioning? And then if you could talk about the elements that tend to go into it when you at Frasier are working with a client.
Oh, I gotta correct you on the name of my agency. It's Fazer. F-A.
Fazer. I'm the worst. Fazer.
That's
F A
yeah.
Z E
Oh, we're
R.
not the, yeah, Fazer. We're not the TV show Frasier.
And you're not Brendan Fraser.
Exactly.
You're
Right.
Fazer.
Exactly. No, we're not. Although I hear he just did a great new movie. Anyway,
You're phasing the competition.
that's right. That's right. We're stunning them with our Fazer.
Nice, nice. Set to
Anyway,
phase. All right. I just gave you a new tagline for your agency. You're welcome. All right,
thank
so
you. Yeah.
let's talk about positioning and how you would go through it with a client at Phaser.
Thank you. So positioning is when a brand owns a singular idea in the mind of the customer, right? So right now, that singular idea we spoke about earlier for Apple is privacy. Another great example is Volvo, the car company. They own the idea of safety, right? Starbucks owns this idea of community. Like, you might actually not think of the word community, but you feel it, right? So it's that singular idea. That's what brand positioning is, and how you position a brand in the market is how you're going to drive customer perception, right? So then positioning, or once you've positioned a brand in the market, then you can sort of figure out how are we going to strategize our story, our messaging, top line messaging, our narrative, how are we going to design the brand, so forth and so on. So that's really the definition of brand positioning. You
And
want
so
me to make
then,
a list though?
no, I would love to. So, what is the process when you are coming up with that for a client? What are the elements that go into that? And does the hierarchy of those elements shift from client to client, or does it tend to be fairly absolute in your mind?
Well, I mean, every client is different, every sector is different, every product is different. But the things that we look at and analyze, which I've spoken about a couple times so far, is the customer themselves. You know, what are they looking for? What are those desires? What's the problem that you're trying to solve for them, right? And then how you position a brand in a market. The most effective way to do it is to figure those things out, then figure out like what are the positives that you have that are going to shine a negative light onto your competitors. What can you do better, right? What can you do that they can't do? So the one thing that Apple does that Amazon can't do is they deliver privacy. Bam, there's a brand position that we can own, right? Back 20, 30 years ago when Apple started, or 40 years ago, it was a long time, right? It was usability. And who was the competitor? IBM, right? Or Microsoft, right? Those companies weren't delivering on beautiful, easy experiences with computers. Apple delivered on that. Suddenly, I could have a personal computer. So you're looking at those things. You're digging deep into those points about the customer, right? And you're looking deep into the things about competitors, specifically weaknesses, and through that you come up with a brand positioning. Then once you have the position, let's say our positioning is privacy. How do we deliver on the story, right? How do we tell people who we are? How do we tell them what we do? How do we tell them why we should matter? And that's where brand purpose comes in, because they should care for a reason, and we should deliver on things that are good. I do believe brand purpose is important. David Ocker has written a lot of books and written a lot on brand purpose. I think his new book is all about brand purpose, and it's fantastic. So it is a really key element of it. But you got deciding and defining who you are, what you do, why people should matter, and then how you do things. And it becomes your brand story. And the deeper you tell a story about your brand, about your products, the more people are going to care about you. So, yeah, I mean, brand, without a doubt, it drives desire, and in a way that nothing else does. So, obviously,
Absolutely.
obviously, you and I are big proponents of this brand thing, aren't we?
Little bit. I talk about
Little,
it every
little bit,
week. I chat
little
about it every week. It's kind of a sickness. All right, so a couple things that I want to dig into a little bit more there. So regarding the depositioning and
bit. Yeah.
pointing out where you shine and others don't, sometimes you want to identify that. Sometimes you want to make it clear who you're talking about and what shortcoming you're talking about. And then I imagine other times you want to make it a little more subtle. You're simply presenting your strengths in a way that subtly highlights the lack. So, how do you kind of decide which way to go with that? Does it come down to the brand values and brand voice? Like, how do you figure out how deep you want to go into the whole depositioning thing?
Well, it depends on the client that you're working for in the market. I think what we're always trying to do is find that one big idea, like a privacy, that shines the brightest light. Now, sometimes you figure it out by doing analysis into the market. You might test one idea versus the next. Most of the time, though, I think when you've got senior executives in the room, you can sort of figure out, because they know the market so well and they know the competitors so well. But once you come up on that, on that big idea, whether it's privacy, community, safety, whatever, you're there. And then it's really about bringing in, the creative team, writers and designers, to define, write the verbal brand story, and designers to figure out how to do visual storytelling. Right. And that could be through anything from like logo design to just brand design in general. Telling that story, the deep storytelling part of it is critical as well. I mean, we find a lot of brands that come to us, they have a very top line story. It hasn't been filled out enough. And we tell them all the time, you got to go deep. The deeper you go, the better. And really understanding messaging hierarchy, right? What's our top line message, right? What's secondary, what's tertiary down the line, and really understanding how to put things in order.
Now, what about when that messaging changes, when that brand positioning changes? We've seen it done well. To your examples, Apple shifting from primarily being about usability to instead hammering home on that privacy message. We've also seen it done poorly. Victoria's Secret comes to mind. They realized that the body positivity movement and diversity in who they serve and who they show was kind of forcing their hand, and they did it wrong. They said, instead of being sexy and aspirational, we're going to give you, big old burlap sacks, essentially. So they repositioned in the wrong way. So how do you know as a brand when it is time to shift your positioning? And how do you make sure you're going about it correctly in a way that will actually land?
Oh, it's analytics. I mean, you're going to find out right away, either people buy or they don't. So if you make a shift in the positioning, like the way that Victoria's Secrets did it, and it doesn't work, you better shift back or shift somewhere else that it is going to work. It's about, moving quickly. And, good chief executives know how to do that and know how to analyze it and know how to make those moves. A friend of mine was working on an account. He was an agency owner, and he was running an account for a big car company. And it was I think it was back in 2008, 2009, when the economy was declining, and they had a very conservative CFO who said, let's cut our advertising. Let's just cut it. We got to save money. They cut the advertising, and the sales went away. And they're like, "Bam, we got to turn it back on. Okay, now we got to turn it." So they followed the advice of a chief executive or of a chief executive who had the wrong opinion but was pushy enough to make a decision over a chief marketing officer, and they saw what happened, which is sales went away. So in the case of Victoria's Secret, if they're going to make a change like that and they see sales go away, they got to pivot quickly, really, really quickly. And it takes strong leadership to make those decisions.
What are some things you should not tinker with when you're trying to change that positioning?
I think it's important to do things that are true and authentic. You can't be selling smoke. It doesn't really go very far, right? You've got to deliver on product. So, sometimes we see clients come to us and they've got a lot of like hyperbolic messaging that's based around something that they don't deliver on, and they're wondering why their sales aren't good. You got to deliver on every touch point, whether it's brand, whether it's product, whether it's operations, whether it's people. It's got to be real. Authenticity is really important. I mean, the great thing about Apple is they can deliver on privacy. They're not just saying they're delivering on it. The great thing about Starbucks, they actually do deliver on the things that they promise. So, you talk about purpose, promise, whatever. Yeah, if you're going to make a promise to a customer, you better deliver.
Todd, we could talk about this all day long. I love this. This has been so wonderfully eye-opening. I'm loving this, and it's definitely making me think about branding in a bunch of different directions. What are kind of your final mic drop tips of how to approach brand positioning?
I think it's something that I think you have to find an agency to do it. I don't think that many companies can do it on their own. They try, they fail, then they go and try to find an agency to do it for them. Specifically, if you're going to be doing brand positioning work or brand strategy work with an agency that specifically does that. Don't go to a PR agency or a performance marketing agency or a digital marketing agency to do your brand work. Find an actual brand strategy or creative agency that actually has been doing it for a long time, knows how to do it strategically, understands markets, knows how to analyze markets, and does it in a way that's going to be competitive, as opposed to sort of fluffy, just based around purpose. I think that's a mistake. I feel strongly about it. There are a lot of great agencies out there, and they're all in the finding on the Google.
Indeed. How's the Google
Google.
on privacy? I kind of wonder. Anyway, thank you so much for being here, Todd Irwin from Fazer. Please tell the good folks at home where they can find you, why they should find you, and what they will find there.
You can find me on LinkedIn. Also, our agency, Fazer, Fazer. Our website is fazer.agency. You can find me there. Happy to talk to anybody about this stuff. We are total brand strategy nerds.
Well, thank you so much, Todd. This has definitely been very helpful for anyone trying to figure out their brand positioning, especially since the show is airing in January, which is definitely a time for that sort of investigative work more than a lot of other times are.
Can't believe it's January already.
I know, it's crazy. All right, and thank you, person at home or wherever you are, whether you are listening to this on your podcast player of choice with the Adweek Podcast Network, make sure that you subscribe to Let's Talk About Brand. We drop new episodes every Monday, and if you like it, please leave a review. Or if you're watching the video podcast on YouTube, thanks for being here as well. Also, please subscribe. And you can also leave a review if you like it. That's more of a comment situation. But thanks very much, and come back next week when I will be talking to another smart guest about an element of branding. See you then. Thanks for listening to Let's Talk About Brand, part of the Adweek Podcast Network and Acast Creator Network. This podcast was produced by Christine Gritman, executive produced by Al Manarino and John Heil, and edited by Christine Gritman. You can listen and subscribe to all of Adweek's podcasts by visiting adweek.com/podcasts. Stay updated on all things Adweek Podcast Network by following us on Twitter at Adweek Podcasts. And if you have a question or suggestion for the show, send us an email at podcast@adweek.com.